The origin of tragedy or the origin of Greek tragedy from the birth of tragedy by Friedrich Nietzsche. The discussion will cover the following points. Friedrich Nietzsche was a German philosopher and a critic. He wrote extensive and various books and essays on diverse topics like religion, morality, philosophy, literature, and criticism. His writings influenced many people. From all the critical essays of the previous writers and from the writings of different English poets, we come to the conclusion that all these philosophers, all these critics and poets were profoundly impressed by Greek civilization and Greek culture. Like other philosophers, critics, and poets, Nietzsche also insists on the importance of Greek culture and Greek literature because all these critics and poets considered ancient Greeks as their ancestors, as their mentors in art, literature, and philosophy. The Birth of Tragedy was published in 1872. It is considered one of his most famous works in which he has discussed literature and especially he focused on the topic of Greek tragedy. He has tried to find, to explore, to investigate, to discuss the origin of Greek tragedy because tragedy is considered to be the oldest of all literary genres. The Birth of Tragedy consists of 25 chapters, out of which the first six chapters are introductory in nature and the real in depth discussion starts from the seventh chapter. The book does not exclusively and only deal with the topic of Greek tragedy, it deals with different and various things and topics like Greek civilization, Greek society, its influence on modern Western society and civilization, the state of Greek literature before the birth of tragedy, the relationship between art and science, and various other topics. So, the book is not just limited to the topic of Greek tragedy. In this book, Nietzsche has discussed many other related things and topics. Nietzsche begins his discussion on Greek tragedy by introducing two major Greek influences, the Apollonian and the Dionysian. He uses these terms to describe two opposing artistic forces. The Apollonian, derived from the Greek god Apollo, represent calmness, reason, order, and structure. In contrast, the Dionysian, associated with the god Dionysus, embodies raw emotion and ecstasy. Nietzsche explores the roots of Greek tragedy in the interplay between the Apollonian and Dionysian forces. In the opinion of Nietzsche, the marvelous genre of tragedy originated when the opposing forces of the Apollonian and the Dionysian came closer and got integrated. This is the central idea or main statement of Nietzsche about the origin of Greek tragedy. After this, he explains how these two opposing artistic forces, the Apollonian and the Dionysian, contributed to the development of Greek tragedy. Apollo and Dionysus were brothers and both were the sons of the chief Greek god Zeus. Now, Greek concepts of God and religion were very different from the modern concept of religion. Their gods had their own particular domains, they were not multitaskers. These two gods, Apollo and Dionysus, had their own characteristics, their own domains. They are totally contrasted and different from each other. The influences, domains, and characteristics of both these gods were totally opposite. Apollo was the god of art, music, poetry, medicine, and soothsaying. In the ancient Greek tragedies, we often read about prophets. For example, in Oedipus Rex, there is a blind prophet Tiresias, and in Agamemnon, there is the character of Cassandra who knew about the future. The ancient Greeks believed that the prophets knew about the future, and this gift, this knowledge was given to them by god Apollo. We repeatedly come across the mention of god Apollo in the Greek tragedies like Agamemnon and Oedipus Rex. God Apollo, Dionysus, and Zeus had an immense influence on ancient Greek society. Dionysus was the god of theater, wine, ecstasy or madness, sufferings, and hardships. He was a god of double or dual nature. The character of god Dionysus was very interesting. He was the god of many forms and shapes. He could take any face, any form, any shape, and no one knew about his rare identity or face. Dionysus, the god of dual nature. Dionysus was a god of double or dual nature because he was born of an immortal father Zeus and a mortal mother Semele. So in Greek mythology he was considered a god of dual nature. He was at a time mortal and also immortal. Due to his mortal connection, unlike the other gods, he was born to die. That is why Dionysus is also called the aging or dying god in Greek mythology because of his mortal relation with his mother Semele. Now, in the opinion of Nietzsche, it was the influence of Dionysus that created the tragic awareness of life in ancient Greece. For example, from the tragedy Dr. Faustus, we get a lesson that human beings cannot become gods and excess of everything is bad. Similarly, from Oedipus Rex, we get a lesson that human beings are helpless before the fate created by God. Greek society had a very strong belief in their gods and the fate made by them. That was the lesson they wanted to give to their audience. We can say that through the sufferings of the central character or hero protagonist, the playwright conveys a certain lesson to the audience. It is called the tragic awareness of life because it is through your sufferings that you learn in life. Tragedy also teaches you about life, tragic awareness through all the sufferings of the central character. The god Dionysus had a very complex nature. On one side, he was connected to the immortal god Zeus, who was his father, and on the other side, he was connected with a mortal mother, Semele. So, in this way, we say that Dionysus had a very complicated and complex nature, and the same complexities we also witness in the genre of tragedy. Because conflict is the essence, it is the soul of tragedy, and without conflict, tragedy is not possible. Conflict creates tension. Now, that conflict may be internal, as we witness in the case of Dr. Faustus, or it may be external in the form of a villain and hero. Tragedy was initially presented and performed during a festival held in March, the season of spring. During this time, the ancient Greeks would celebrate, drink, and dance. According to Nietzsche, tragedy originated during the festivals dedicated to the god Dionysus, such as the city Dionysia, which were celebrated annually in March, the season of spring. The ancient Greeks honored Dionysus, the god of wine, ecstasy, and theater with singing, dancing, drinking wine, and attending theatrical performances, as theater was the only form of entertainment in those ancient times. They were under the influence of those characteristics like ecstasy and madness which are associated with god Dionysus. Now, Friedrich Nietzsche does not specifically mention a city or place by name where tragedy originated in the birth of tragedy. His approach is less about pinpointing a physical location and more about exploring the metaphysical and cultural forces that gave birth to the tragedy as an art form. However, based on historical context, Greek tragedy is believed to have originated in the Greek city of Athens during the annual festivals held in honor of the god Dionysus. Athens is regarded as the birthplace of Greek tragedy. Ancient Greece was divided into various city-states, and Athens was one of the most prominent among them. Athens was considered the cultural and intellectual center of Greek civilization, literature, and philosophy, and it was renowned for its contributions to Greek culture, philosophy, art, and theater. Once again, based on historical context, Greek tragedy is believed to have originated in Athens, particularly during festivals like the city Dionysia, dedicated to Dionysus. Nietzsche acknowledges the connection to Dionysian rituals but does not explicitly tie tragedy's origin to Athens in his work. Choral songs and the birth of tragedy. Tragedy was born out of choral songs. Initially, there were no individual characters. People would go to the theater and only listen to the choral songs in which certain stories were narrated by the chorus, a group of musicians and singers. With the passage of time, individual characters were also introduced. Nietzsche says that we are in this modern and scientific age which is characterized by intelligence, logic, and rationalism. We sometimes celebrate, dance, drink, and get mad and violent, losing our senses in this madness, showing the Dionysian spirit in us. According to Nietzsche, that happens because of the Dionysian spirit in us. Apollo, on the other hand, was associated with logic, reason, a calculated life, rational thinking, and maturity. These are characteristics humans acquire as they grow and mature in life. In other words, God Apollo stands for rationalism, logic, maturity, and reason. In the opinion of Nietzsche, it is art and particularly the genre of tragedy that integrates diverse, contrasting, and opposite elements and characteristics. For example, the consciousness and madness, logic and madness, ignorance and knowledge. For example, in Oedipus Rex, Oedipus is ignorant about many facts, including his own fate at the start of the play. However, by the end of the play, he becomes aware of it, gains knowledge, and learns a lesson. Nietzsche says that tragedy is the genre that synthesizes, amalgamates, and integrates all these opposite energies and characteristics. In the ancient Greek age, three playwrights were very famous: Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. At the end, Nietzsche strongly criticizes Euripides for various reasons. Nietzsche says that Euripides introduced many individual characters in his plays, and the inclusion of many characters decreased, minimized the role of gods and goddesses in Greek tragedy. Earlier it was present. For example, in the play Agamemnon, written by Aeschylus, the oldest of the Greek playwrights, gods and goddesses directly and openly interfere in the lives of the characters. Gods and goddesses have roles like other human characters in the play. They participate in the action, the story, and contribute to the development of the plot. For example, the ships of Agamemnon were stopped by goddess Artemis in the middle of the sea. Goddess Artemis wanted the sacrifice of Agamemnon's dear daughter Iphigenia. Only after that could his ships proceed further. This was the direct action of a goddess in the play. Goddess Artemis was shown acting just like the other human characters in the play. In Sophocles' Oedipus Rex, we see a slightly lesser role of gods compared to Agamemnon. Although the gods play an important role, the fate of Oedipus is made by the gods. Yet they do not intervene as openly in the course of the play or the action of the play as we see in Agamemnon. The gods in Oedipus Rex influence the lives of the characters, yet they remain behind the curtains. They remain hidden. Nietzsche says that Euripides diminished. He even finished the role of gods and goddesses. He secularized the genre of tragedy. Earlier Greek tragedy conveyed a certain moral lesson to the audience. The roles of gods and goddesses were very evident in the story, and most protagonists came from high social status. They could be kings, generals, or ministers. Nietzsche says that Euripides totally changed the pattern, design, structure, and characterization of tragedy. Euripides used common people as the main characters in his plays. Euripides was too much inclined towards Apollonian characteristics. He diminished the role of Greek gods and Greek mythology in his plays. Nietzsche says that these changes, which were introduced by Euripides, relegated tragedy from something spiritual and moral to something more realistic and logical. Rationalism and logic were associated with god Apollo, emotions, madness, and violence were associated with god Dionysus. In the opinion of Nietzsche, Euripides disturbed the delicate coherence between Apollonian and Dionysian characteristics that were earlier present in Greek tragedy. Euripides was too much inclined toward Apollonian characteristics. As a result, tragedy lost its sublimity. Nietzsche talks about how Socrates changed the way people thought about life and art in ancient Greece. Socrates believed in reason, logic, and the idea that knowledge could solve all problems and bring happiness. While this approach was important, Nietzsche felt it led to the decline of Greek tragedy. For Nietzsche, Greek tragedy was special because it balanced two forces, the Apollonian and Dionysian. Socrates' way of thinking focused too much on reason and left no room for the chaos and mystery of life which tragedy embraced. Nietzsche also connects Socrates' influence to Euripides, who changed Greek tragedies by making them more logical and human centered, reducing the role of gods and myths. This shift, Nietzsche argues, disrupted the deep and emotional impact of tragedy, leading to its decline.